at least as much as possible incorporated into the draft you're seeing already. And we're bringing it back to show you what that was and how the public feedback and the council feedback has come into the plan implementation, and check in with you all again so that hopefully, if things go well, today's meeting, we'll see how everything says. We will schedule the public hearing for plan adoption for the next P&Z meeting. I'll wait to hear from you all on that, but that is the goal. And just a note on that, if it is important that for the adoption public hearing, as well as there will be another public hearing on next month's agenda, that members who wish to vote are in person. I just want to, so if you think you might be virtual, it'd be really good to know ahead of time.
So when is the vote would be the April meeting then?
Yes.
Okay. That which is the 21st, did I
It's
say?
April 16th.
Oh, 16th.
I can share more info on it after. I just wanted to put that on the radar. And then when we're ready, we'll go to Dylan and he's gonna share with us public comment summary and the draft comprehensive plan that is nearing ready for approval.
Okay. We usually have Dylan give us an overview of what we've all been looking at. So why don't we go to you, Dylan?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll go a little different direction this time.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it's good to be back with you all. It's been a while. I hope everyone's doing well. So let's see. I have queued up the public comment summary as well as the draft plan, but I think I wanted to start by just saying, so the last week, Jess and I met with town council and we, presented the public feedback that we received. And we had good discussions with council about, what we thought was, the right information to incorporate into the plan and what was the right information to maybe set aside and address in either another, format. So for example, maybe there were a couple of comments that pertain in Jess and I's mind to something that would make more sense for potential future land use code update. And so we provided that recommendation to council that maybe that would be the best place to address some of those particular comments. Council was in agreement. And so the draft plan that you have in your packet reflects the comments that we thought that we heard from council made the most sense to incorporate. The only thing that's somewhat missing from that is a few comments that we're getting clarification on from Vail Resorts. So Jess has sort of initiated that conversation with Melissa Sherburne, who was a representative of Vail Resorts that provided public comments to the draft plan during the public comment window. There's a few things that were not, in my opinion, earth-shattering, just a few clarifications on numbers that they updated. So we're just, we have the questions out to them, and when we hear back from them, Jess and I can convene and figure out what the best way to address the text edits in the document are from there. But it shouldn't change the substance of the document in any meaningful way. So I'll just pause there, and assuming that you all have read the packet material or at least skimmed through it, I guess I'll just see if there's any high-level questions before we maybe dive in more deeply.
Just a general question on schedule. When do you think you'll get the feedback from Vail with regard to the comments that came out from the council?
I got a response almost immediately saying, I'll look into this and get back to you soon. I think they have a process for running it through the departments, but I'll follow up soon. It's
because I know we're about ready to say, yay, do it, but one of our most important inputs from our business leaders is pending. I hate I'd like to push them a little bit, but don't want to get too carried away.
We can push them a little bit, just to elaborate on the clarifications that we're getting. They're not substantive changes that need to be made, but there were questions from one of the council members about why those changes were requested. So once we have an understanding of why, it probably will be done very quickly. It's just wording changes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, it's wording.
Yeah.
Wording and a number related.
Yeah, for instance, one of the examples is around parking spaces. I think in the draft plan, we, listed the number of parking spaces that we were able to find from the the latest transportation report that Vail Resorts had initiated. And so then it sounds like maybe the numbers had changed or their accounting had changed since that report had been completed. So I think, it's more than likely that it was just like a situation where information that we were able to find just needed to be corrected based on the latest and greatest data that they have. But yeah, I would say that the number of parking spot changes, things of that nature, are kind of like what we're requesting clarification on. But when we look back at the recommendations provided in the plan, the numbers and that wouldn't change any other direction that we would provide for recommendations.
Right. Dylan, I had to start with high level things, that
Please.
obviously there's a change from 4 core values to 5 core values. And one of the commenters also had a whole big discussion of the statistics and the numbers and the percentages and all that related to housing, which
Right.
looks like it's become a 5th value. So I wanted to know if you could just kind of give us a little summary of that piece of this.
100%. That's a great question, Melanie. Yeah, so let's see. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay.
Yeah.
So this slide kind of talks a little bit about kind of getting at the what the commenter. So Melanie's reference is one of the public comments that we received from resident Keystone was just making sure that we were clarifying the assumption that went into setting housing as one of the core values. So when the plan was released for public comment, there was sort of 4 core values, and it was housing, sustainability, mobility, and mobility connectivity. And we did not include parks and recreation, which we added and made a 5th value out of, because there was sort of a clerical error when we were putting together the executive summary that misrepresented the percentage of respondents that prioritized affordable housing. This was actually the number of respondents, and so it was just a sort of an error of bringing the proper number in over. We've adjusted how that's represented in the document to make sure that we're actually communicating that effectively and correctly.
Okay.
The thing that we talked about with council was, and this was pointed out by the member of the public who provided this comment, would be that housing would then drop out of sort of the top 4 values, but a sort of plurality, I would say, of council members indicated that taking housing out of a core value would kind of not align with their understanding of the community needs, and encourage that we just expand the core values to include 5 as opposed to 4. Yeah, so that was kind of the direction that we went there. And I'll pause to see if there's any questions.
There was, well, actually, does anybody have, let me do my quick follow-up and then I'll turn it back to the room. There's a place, I'll find that there's a different place in the document itself that talks about 4 core value. No, I know that sometimes it says 4 and sometimes it says 5, but then the way they're listed is different. There's one time where they're listed and like accountability is given as a value.
Yes.
Which doesn't match what our 5 are.
Good point, Melanie. That must be you must have
It's in the executive summary as well.
I think it's in the page 12 of the executive summary.
Yeah. Yep.
And then versus page 33
Three,
of the
yeah.
document.
Yep, I think that's a great point, Melanie. I think at one point, the sort of 5 core values that show up on page 7 of the executive summary were at one point called like 5 pillars or planning pillars or something like that.
Right.
And then I think somehow the verbiage changed. So I'm going to make a note right now to amend that. Thank you so much for pointing that out.
Yeah, for sure.
Match these 5.
Tim, is that you?
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Go ahead.
the ones on page 33 don't match the ones on, they both have 5, but they're not the same 5.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think that the values that show up on page 33, this is sort of a way that the plan is trying to create alignment with the RTAP action plan as well. So these values that show up on page 33 are also the values that showed up in the RTAP action plan. And we thought that since part of the public engagement process included sort of the opportunity to work with the student group and now Jess on the RTAP plan, and because that provided, I think, meaningful direction in influencing, sort of the town's policy and also the formation of committees and formation of certain direction that the town is already taking, that seemed like the pulling the values over from that process and creating that alignment between the 2 planning documents made a lot of sense. I think one thing that we can easily do to kind of create a better distinction is in the executive summary, there's, instead of those being labeled core values, we can name them like planning pillars or something to that end, just to distinguish those 2 things more. And I think part of what we're, kind of communicating about these sort of pillars, or however we want to frame them in the executive summary, is that sort of these are, as you're kind of thinking about future policy direction, as you're thinking about like what are the big ticket items that are sort of broad brush, like areas of like that the community really cares about, that we heard from the community feedback. These are kind of the things that are sort of the key driving indicators, right? That I think also kind of tee up like the major focus areas of the plan. So not necessarily like, I think to further continue distinguishing this, I guess, since I have the mic, page 33, like the values, I think kind of align more so with like, this is what the community states as like their priorities for what they want the town's values to be. And then on page 7, these 5 areas are like the topics within the planning realm that the community said that they want to see the town invest in the most. I hope that makes sense.
I think it'll just be a matter of just getting the wording so that it doesn't look like we're contradicting ourselves within the document.
Melanie, can I make a comment? I
Sure.
can't help myself, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
And Dylan, I've talked a lot about housing semantics. You know what I really like, and it is a term now that academia is using. You can actually get a degree in the built environment as a practitioner. I love the term built environment. And I noticed, for instance, on page 33, in the accountability, responsible investments in new infrastructure with amenities and maintaining the built environment. I think there is such a prominent built environment here that mixes low density housing, I'm going to say it, with density housing and the commercial and recreational amenities that go with it. So I know you're at the end here and it's maybe not material of an insertion, but I think that is a very widely recognized generic term.
Yeah, that's certainly one that I agree, Wendy, that I've heard of people using the built environment. I'd say more and more. It's like definitely one of those things where, in my experience, in my career trajectory in planning, I've seen a lot of terms kind of come and go, and I think the built environment seems to be sticking around.
Yeah, and like my daughter just finished a master's degree at Denver U, and she has a master's in real estate in the built environment. And I'm like, that's good. It's to me broader but very readably and understood. And you know what? I think all the writing in this report, I've said it to you before, I think it is excellent because it's written in implementation terms. It's not a bunch of chat GBT, okay? I mean, no, this is like, it's written like a handbook for the decision makers. And, I just think it's a really well done collateral piece.
Could you define the built environment for this for ignorant soul?
That includes, it's all inclusive, so it's ground up architecture, design, build, the infrastructure and the public improvements that go with it. But as important is the overall aesthetic. Like, we can't lose who we are with our physical identification here. We look so different than every other community in Summit County. Okay.
Right.
And maybe, okay, now I'm sorry, I'm wound up. Maybe that should go in your terms too. It's probably an academic term that's defined now. Maybe not, I don't know.
I think, Peter, maybe one way that I think about the built environment is sort of like, we talk about land uses a lot, right? And I think sort of like to try and bring it up a level, we kind of further distinguish like agricultural and sort of parks and open space areas that are more, I guess, predominantly natural settings, as we just kind of frame them as the natural environment, and then areas which the real estate market would call improvements on land. So anything that's like a built structure, kind of beyond like a shed or anything like that that might accompany that of a natural area, we tend to just broadly categorize as the built environment. So it's sort of like, a way of framing sort of the two distinguishing buckets of areas that see development, and we tend to provide infrastructure to service, versus natural lands that are tend to be more open or without improvements or structures.
Right. Steve,
Okay.
Steve had his hand up.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Dylan, two questions. One is more just kind of an overview. So the one thing, and I may have missed it, so I apologize, but when I look, the Keystone Neighborhood Company kind of overlaps in a very interesting, unique way. And it does have input, and I maybe I missed it, but I think we need to talk about how that plays in. So like, if someone says, I want more activities in River Run, that's not going to be Vail. That's going to be Keystone Neighborhood Company. But then you also need to understand is everybody doesn't pay into that. So there's going to be this tension and I'm not talking about what's going on now. There's tension between the people who want more activities, but their smaller group pays into it. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying, I think there's a nuance there. People just need to understand when they plan. So if there is, I want more or better retail, that's a Vail issue. If I want more activities, that's a Keystone Neighborhood Company. And I think you need to make sure people understand that, because I think it took me a while to understand, and I've been here a long time, just how that works. And I think that is important to understand as people implement what you're projecting. Some may be easier than others. And so it's doing that, and then being a little clearer on you know, River Run is Vale, but then you got Mountain House, and you got Lakeside Village. And if we could just be a little clear, like who's really controlling the levers for each of those groups, then as somebody, when we're not all sitting around here, they understand the stakeholders they got to deal with, because each one will be a different stakeholder and there could be different objectives and criteria. So it was just from a high level as I read through it. It was kind of just my overall. I agree, great report, but that was something that I think was missing, but if I missed it, I apologize.
No, I think that's important context, Steve. I think maybe ways in which we kind of get at it more subtly is maybe like in the area in the sort of foundation setting piece of describing like areas where there's sort of municipal responsibility versus, private entities. But I do think that maybe like that further distinguishing, especially the role of K and C in
Mhm.
particular, which I think is an important nuance point that you mentioned, Steve, especially because not everybody pays into KNC. KNC provides
Right.
a lot of activation for River Run, sort of a major economic development driver. Yeah, I could see like maybe needing to walk out that point a little bit more and perhaps
Yeah,
the economic development portion of the plan. I think that could be good context. Yeah.
okay, okay, thank you. And then as a follow-up, kind of along the same lines, and maybe it's more for me to understand better. So when we became a town, I think a lot of people thought, a major portion of the real estate taxes and all this came into this, so there was going to be this big bucket. And so when people are like, well, you got all this money now, why aren't you doing this? Again, this is for the group to kind of opine on, but I think that might be good to, like the HOT tax. Does that come back to Keystone? I'm not even clear. I asked Lindsay about certain taxes there. I don't know. It's just understanding where the taxes flow and flow back also will help people better understand where there's maybe a bigger opportunity for success, because as we know, everything's driven by the budget. So if a particular revenue stream comes back in a meaningful way, it might change people's priorities, because you can wish all you want, but if it's not the money to implement it, it's not going to happen. So it's just another minor clarification on how the tax revenue flows out and comes back in, so people understand how that could be applied to your implementation. So anyway, that was my second point.
Actually, like you touch on 5A and 5B, and there's the ready pot of $1 million, but I think, or I already complimented what's implementable, is that a word?
I think so.
I think just a little bit more touching on money in, money out, and who's controlling those pots of money, because that definitely impacts the built
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, exactly, Wendy. That you were on the same page. That's exactly what I thought. It's just good to clarify that. Because, like I said,
just
I'm
don't-
still not clear.
I'm wondering though, whether is that something that should be in a comprehensive plan? I'm wondering if that's what Dylan is thinking about. Is that like a separate sort of thing that council puts together and puts on the website or something?
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
I
yeah.
I think my brain went in a lot of different directions. I think one on so many levels, I certainly agree. I mean, to kind of reveal some of my hand, like my personal philosophy is that I think like towns, like a lot of planning should be rooted in like what the town can fiscally like manage and what they can actually responsibly adhere to. However, I do think that yeah, I would say it's a bit atypical to include in a comprehensive plan, like a full walkout of like the money in, money out, sort of like inflows, outflows. And I think part of the reason that that doesn't always show up in a comprehensive plan is because, for the most part, most people read a comprehensive plan and a lot of the data that's captured in there is sort of a snapshot in time, right? So if we include like what sort of tax revenues coming in and like what the expenditures are now, that would be kind of reflective of, Q1 2026 through like, kind of this current snapshot. And then, a year into like the plan, right? Like maybe some things have changed, or maybe the voters have approved a bond, or maybe the voters have approved a new tax, or something to that end. And then that sort of shifts like some of the priorities. And I think it's also sort of typical to take the plan and kind of the implementation side of the plan. A lot of people don't necessarily like talk about what that looks like, but a lot of what that looks like is continued conversations, right, amongst you, amongst town staff, amongst council to kind of like say, okay, we have all these ideas and we have all these priorities that we identified in this planning process. Like, how do we prioritize what we want to pursue and what do we want to take action on? And sometimes those priorities might come up through the conversations that you all have together to kind of outline this is where we want to put the money that we have to kind of back some of these particular recommendations because we think that they're going to be, moving the needle because this is what the plan kind of talks about. Or you might also kind of implement things in a little bit of a leapfrog way, right? So Jess might be keeping track of what state and federal grants are available, and something comes up that allows you to implement something from transportation section recommendation 4, and maybe that wasn't a priority you identified for 2026 to 2027, but that funding opportunity becomes available, you're competitive for the grant, and it moves up the priority in that timeline. And so there might be a little bit of shifting that happens. And also, I mean, I guess my other take just is that a community's budget is typically public information that's also found and can be requested from members of the public, and so that there should be sort of that transparency at least within sort of a separate document. And so I think that I would say that the plan and the budget can like work together without necessarily referencing the tax revenue into the plan itself.
Yeah, no, if I wasn't clear, I didn't mean to like say it's, $3,452,000. I think it was
Okay.
more from a very higher level. They're just saying that with all of these implementations from a high level, the major taxing bases flow this way. Don't get into tax amounts. It's more of a clarification. And if it's available somewhere else, that's great. I'm just, people I've talked to on that, they had a perception that the pot was going to be bigger, and it's not.
Yeah.
Real estate taxes go directly to the county, and I really don't understand how it flows back. I thought HOT was coming straight back to Keystone. I'm not sure that's the case. So maybe it's a different conversation and a different document. So I hear what you're saying, but okay, no, those were the 2 points I had.
Okay.
And just picking up on what was said on page 11, it really struck me. Again, it's the wonderful wording that you use. Decisions made, investments chosen, partnerships built. And you know what? We don't want, none of this is going to get done in a vacuum. So, and it doesn't take much writing, it takes referencing as to the sources of funds and where you go for that.
Yeah, I mean,
Investments,
because I think that's a really good point. I think to some degree, right, like the plan sort of sends us in many ways, like when you're in year 3, year 4 of implementation of the plan, it can still send a signal about like what are some values to invest based on, like based on your priorities or based on or policies or time and energy. And you can kind of use that as a solid document to lean on for guidance on what kind of priorities the town should pursue. But yeah, like to Wendy's point, some things may change over time, and it's just making sure that you have the right partners in place, that you leverage opportunities when they come up, that generally what your community values, and that you're kind of keeping a good pulse on what your budget is and what you think you can responsibly maintain and implement, given the revenues that you have. And I think it's got to be tricky, right? Because this is kind of interesting for me too, right? Also learning alongside you all as a newly incorporated town, right? And the typical community I'm used to working within that has a more mature tax base, right? Like changes to their revenue tend to fluctuate based on property values, assessment changes, or changes in sales tax, or like a new idea, like a new tax revenue that might come through. But I think right now I have to imagine there's a certain degree of like getting your feet underneath you at this stage of like understanding what the certain revenue structures are going to actually look like and what the pots are going to be now that you're kind of seeing things come in and out of the door.
Melanie, I have a couple of thoughts in that general vein, if I might.
Yeah, sure. And then after you, Peter, I have a KNC comment. I wanted to go on top of Steve's, but go ahead, Peter.
In the realm of finance, one of the things we did during the RTAP process is to, based on a high-level feel for value and cost, we eliminated certain ideas. They just were taken out because they were beyond scope, either because of the perceived cost or the perceived time frame. I'm a little concerned that we put too much of finance information in this. As you alluded to, that's a little unusual, but it does bring up a very significant point, is that we do have budget reviews. They are public, but even when I read through that, I'll must admit that's a spreadsheet coming from our finance person in the staff. And what might kind of give us our a possible partial solution to what we're alluding to, which is sharing with the public more general flow of funding, and what doesn't flow, which is not something that ever goes into a spreadsheet in general, is could the staff potentially periodically have a general, and keep it so simple, like one-page summary of, you know, what's going in, what's going out, and by the way, these are things that are not in that flow, because there is absolutely a general perception when you get your tax bill from the county, they're thinking, okay, how much is Keystone getting out of that? And there's a lot of perspectives on it. No direct flow comes in. Indirectly, there's 2 or 3 things we get through grants of good. That kind of short one-pager with a summary of what's happening now and what might happen for a year or proposed could be a very useful document for personally when I get some very strong comments from constituents about it costs how much for one single buyback on the land deal that the town is reviewing with the county and others with regards to restricted housing that's being built over in Summit Cove. I got a pretty good sized earful and a lot of misinformation mixed into that, but I don't have a nice simple, by the way, that doesn't happen, this happens this way, by the way, that is one of the cheaper ones. And that's going to be a huge issue when it comes to, you know, since we can't, quote, build ourselves out of our pit that we're in with regards to housing. People have a wide open view, and I would say a whole bunch of different views with regards to perceived costs. And I got a lot of mental and verbal feedback with regards to the town just proposing the cheapest option to get a single unit that would have a potential qualifier with regards to town to Keystone employee using it. So just a 1 or 2 pages might be something we don't do ourselves in this realm and don't put it into the plan. But as the plan goes forward or gets adopted, the town should provide a slightly more digestible form, because some of the abbreviations for that matter in the thing are not well known. And I've had to ask that a few times.
Jess, is that something you could just take as a suggestion back from us back?
Absolutely. I've kind of been waiting to chime in on the tax related conversation just to hear like what we're getting at. And I think where I was leading is kind of where you ended, Peter, with the idea that a summary of how our tax fund system serves the way that we fund projects in the town would be very useful. I think it probably doesn't belong in the comprehensive plan because it is something that changes in ways that are not guided by the comprehensive plan necessarily. Sometimes there's practical matters that you just have to find funding for a project. And I would also say that when tax decisions are made, it's sometimes out of scope of the comprehensive plan. Sometimes it doesn't go through a review process where you have to show that it meets the criteria of the comprehensive plan. So it's a little bit difficult to weave it, But I think that there's value in this being something that is created, and we can pass that on to Heike, because her goal with a lot of her updates that she does in council meetings is to, help the council to understand these things, but there's probably more that can be done to help the whole community understand.
Super, thank you. Peter,
And
you
if
had-
such a document existed, you could, at a minimum, you wouldn't have to just reference it to say, in order to understand funding sources, and how they work, please see this document.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna follow up on, is that Dylan potentially could reference a potential document if we could get commitment from the staff and the council to periodically create that one and or update it. As you said, it should be living down.
And I agree it would be helpful, because no matter how much we've talked about it through all the incorporation process, which I was about, people still think for property taxes. Even though, I don't know how many times I have to explain to people, none of it comes to Keystone.
Yeah.
Other than through services like library,
Right.
those types of things, but nothing comes directly back to Keystone.
Peter, did you have a second thing, or are you good?
I covered the 2 items. Thank you.
Super. Back to Steve's point about KNC being referenced in the plan. I had a note, Dylan, that on page 19, you talk about KNC there. And the question I had is it the only master HOA? It would be nice to say if there's any other ones besides KNC, and also to just mention how many HOAs we have. Tim probably knows this, right?
Well, I mean, there is a sort of defunct one, the Keystone Village Association, which is actually not defunct because Vail is paying the registration, so it's still registered, but it's not active or doing anything. It's kind of the equivalent, the Lakeside Village equivalent of KNC, but it's, for all intents and purposes, it's defunct. And so, kind of like we talked about before, Patrick brought it up, that, I mean, Steve, if activities that happen in River Run are sponsored by KNC, now the town council is looking at doing activities at Lakeside. We're doing some stuff around the 4th of July, and the town is paying for that. And but it's always been a, well, who paid? And one of the reasons Lakeside has degraded so much is because Vail is responsible for any activities and they don't want to spend any money there.
Yeah.
Versus KNC, which is a completely different type of organization. Now, the big battle is, how many of those, and I hear this all the time in terms of how many of those activities actually make money versus lose money. And property owners in KNC are paying money for stuff that they don't care about. Because I think the last time, and it may be different now, there's only 2 of the festivals that actually break even. The rest of them actually lose money. But they generate a lot of rental income for property owners. So we have, but if you don't rent, that doesn't help you. So it's another one of those very misunderstood things. KNC is really the only active master HOA that we have. But there's disparity between the River Run side of the resort and the lakeside, which doesn't have a master HOA. So anything that does, there's somebody else has to fund, because, and I know this all too well, because I created Lakeside Village Council at one point, tried to get more things into, but Vail was, let's just say, less than 4.
Melanie brings up an important point, though. There is an entity that is not quite what you're referring to, but one that might be referenced as one of the bodies that should be involved in conversations, is the Keystone Owners Association. I don't remember it being actually mentioned. Yeah, that's an informal association of all the HOAs, or 90% of them, I should say. I would at least make a mention somewhere in here. I realized I didn't catch that earlier, is that they're an entity that should be in the conversation.
So they could go in on page 19, which is where I saw this still in the reference to KNC. and it describes it as a master HOA. I was thinking also that it should be a master HOA for properties in East Keystone,
Hmm.
which gets also to Tim's point, it's not a master HOA of everyone.
Yeah, that's good.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
But, and you raise a good point, Peter, because KOA is, even though I'm not president, I'm still the business manager, so I still don't know those stuff. They are looking, for instance, I just had a conversation before this meeting, they're looking to co-sponsor a 5K run with the town in September. So they're looking for ways to generate more shoulder season activities. They started doing the community socials for all of the HOA board members, which have now become so large that we can't find a place to do them anymore. Because yeah, it is a good thing. So they are looking for ways to expand in terms of creating more community and looking for, and one of the ideas that just came out last month was bringing back a 5K run in September, tied into Oktoberfest. And I talked with John Crone, and he said, yes, we'd love to do that. So partnering with the town. So it's not a master HOA because it's a voluntary membership. But 63 out of 70 HOAs are members, so it's pretty much everybody in the core, all the HOAs in the core members, the ones that aren't just some of these HOAs that you never heard of.
Kind of.
Yeah, with a couple big ones.
Page 19 might be a very appropriate place because it's required partnerships, and this is just a partnership. I think that we should at least have a couple of sentences describing that here's an entity that provides a particular kind of characteristic of a partnership.
Well, and one of the things they do that the town uses us for a lot is the town doesn't have any way to communicate with all these HOAs. And we do. So we send out memos to, we can't reach every homeowner, but we have every board member of every HOA, so that's 63 times 5, roughly, around 300 people. And then when we send this out, we say, please share this with all of your homeowners because this is important information for them. For instance, we created an STR advisory board, which the town is very happy that we're doing. And so we have an advisory board and we survey all of the homeowners to get input regarding STRs that we then feed into the town. So that that's a good plan. It's a good partnership that is taking on. I think there's still both the town and KOA is trying to figure out, how to make that partnership more useful to the town because it's new, but definitely moving in that direction.
It'd be worth. Okay.
The SDR advisory board, because the town doesn't have a way to communicate directly to all these HOAs unless they sign up.
Right.
And KOA can. Also doing surveys and all sorts of things.
Right. So Dylan, I guess you could add just a couple of these. Did this all make sense to you?
Yeah, I think I'm tracking along all right.
Good.
And I can, if Dylan, if you need some more specifics on, you can get with me. I'm happy to get you some more specific information.
Perfect. That sounds good. I've been taking notes alongside, but I think I'll just follow back up with you so we can make sure everything's good.
I had another high level thing that's easy enough to do, but I think we needed to put in the plan somewhere. Definitely when we talk about the annexation, but maybe even earlier is we've never really said why are the boundaries of the town as they are. Like it's particularly, like we never explain like how come there's pockets and islands. It seems like a logical question that would be nice to know how it ended up being what it is legally. I don't know if you know the answer, Dylan. I don't actually know.
I don't know. I wish I did.
There you go. The Alliance is part of the road and it's part of the road now.
I'm sure that's a complex combination of what happened with, Summit County, their resorts, and the incorporation committee, and what they were all willing to agree to. But I don't have any of the details necessarily on my end.
Yeah,
You know, I think the way you deal with the 3 mile as by state statute on, you know, potentially legal annexation is just fine. I wouldn't comment on that.
okay, so if we don't know, if there's not like sort of a short and sweet reason why the boundaries are the way they are, we'll just leave it out. It's fine.
You know,
Except
if anybody from the,
certain legal characteristics, and I think that might be overburdened in this.
Yeah, it's fine. We can, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
there's
fine.
some real weird things like the highway that, you know, and people probably don't even realize, like, we had to make a choice. Do we include the end of the highway by the parking lot or by River Run, or the end, you know, like from West Hills, even though both sides of the highway are part of the town, the road is not, because we could only have so much of the highway in the town, otherwise it became one of those greater than so many acres, that then there could be something that was not included in part of the town. So there's a lot of weird stuff that happened coming up.
Okay, just sort of legal things, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
and I
all.
am not an attorney.
That's all right, yeah, that's all right.
The most common one is if you have 40 acres within the boundary of the town, that entity has the option. That's really about as much as I would even be willing to put in this document, because it does cause 3 of our sets of islands directly. You know, and it's not any judgment one way or another, that simply they chose, and that's their option. And we as an entity chose to say that might be an option to relook at, because now they understand who we are. Now they can get better understanding and more conversations about what the pros and cons are. The fact that now we have a joint police force might help a little bit. There's about 5 or 6 specific things as we look at potential annexation that we can use as carrots to say, now that you know who we are, here are the 5 or 6 things that you may have been worried about or not even aware of that would happen. Noise ordinance that changes from building to building, you know, just because it happens to be in place at the time. The police call outs, et cetera, might be a little more interesting or a little easier on the, you call the dispatch centers, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go into the details. We can talk about that later when we talk about annexation.
I had a lot of like comments, small comments, Dylan, like that I just, when I was going through, I'd find things that just didn't make sense, you know, something either grammatically or just a question about something. I'm thinking that is just way too boring to go over in a big meeting section. And I wondered if other people had those kinds of things. I thinking it's easier if we just email you those.
Sure. Yeah. If you want to just maybe send those to Jess or and me, and we can just make sure that we catch those. And,
okay.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a couple places where the strikeouts still showed up, which I'm assuming weren't supposed to be there.
I'm sorry, you said?
They were supposed to be there?
No, I don't know. There were strikeouts and there was also some portions in red and I didn't. know
Oh,
what
yeah.
else.
So
Yeah.
that I don't know if the sort of the why or the explainer made it to you. I think that the explanation would land in the what's it called, the public comment summary document. But the things that are struck out or red are areas where we amended the text based on council's feedback from the public comment period. So that's just a way of kind of pointing to where, when the plan was in draft format that the public reviewed, and then when we heard from council, like, this is a way to maybe address this particular public comment, the red and strikeouts are ways in which the text would change based on the direction we got from council to incorporate public comment.
One
So,
note on the mechanism for that feedback is, in the past, Lindsay had been requesting it be sent to him, and he would digest and or distribute accordingly. that puts it a little more on the public record and gets away from the possibility of having conversations outside public meetings. So just FYI, it's a mechanism that he recommended and used in the past a few times where we had particular comments. He said, "Oh, please send it to me." I would suggest that you could potentially be the focal point for that continuing. I assume that's the same kind of thing we want.
Thank you.
Melanie?
Yeah.
Steve's had his hand up for quite a while. I yield to him, but I'd like to get in a few questions and comments of my own.
Yes,
But
why don't you go
Steve's been-
first and then I'll go back to Steve.
Okay. A question about the whole affordable housing question and the outside comments and raising questions as to how high of a priority is the housing situation in Keystone. And I guess I tie into the comments from the 3 Mile Plan and this discussion of the map of Keystone and the boundary in that part of the affordable housing complex that exists on the west side of the town. Part is in, part is not in. And I guess I'd ask the question, are we artificially making our housing situation worse by not having that part in there? And if that's an imminent thing that's going to change by potential of the 3 Mile Plan and annexation, you know, where do we go with it? It's more of a philosophical discussion. I know there needs to be some, but do we make it out like that we're dying on the sword of affordable housing, or it's an issue to be addressed? We're going to address it. I'm open to comments from anybody regarding that, but to me, it strikes as making the situation look much worse than it really is. To me, all of that area, I think of it as affordable housing that's in the town of Keystone, but it's not. And it's also open to other people that don't live and work in Keystone. And, you know, does anybody in Breckenridge give a hoot as to quote what affordable housing they have in their shortage, because people that live and work in Breckenridge are commuting to Keystone to work? Yeah.
The original conversations with the SE group, or not the SE group, the transport team, talked very specifically about the areas that are immediate neighbors. And the one you mentioned is as immediate a neighbor as you can possibly get because they're intermixed. Literally building to building changes ownership and you're in the county or not. But also don't ignore just the other immediate neighbors like Summit Cove. And as the town council just had a conversation about using one of the units being built in Summit Cove to support Keystone workforce housing, at the right terms. I don't think it's being ignored. It is just pretty complex, and there were a lot of conversations. I think it's covered a fair amount in the housing section of it. Is that you do have to keep in mind that you're a tiny 2 square miles in the county, and that our immediate neighbors absolutely affect our behavior with regards to housing, et cetera. So I do agree that there's a lot of complexity in that area, but there were a lot of conversations with the, I can't remember the gentleman's name, Dylan, who helped us with the housing work.
Brian, Stephanie.
Thank you. There were quite a few conversations there. I didn't know if you were privy to both his conversations here with us as well as with town council, because it was actually been expanded more in the council meetings. Just FYI, there's some other information that might be available to you too. Yes.
David, did you have something specific that you wanted Dylan to address in the plan, or was?
No, I more wanted us to have the high level discussion of is this problem number 1 or problem number 5? Or where does that kind of shake out in the executive summary of saying, or the plan of implementation? Is that the first thing that everybody reads and that's our primary goal, or is it down on the list? Just purely, I don't have a terribly strong opinion other than that I think with the data and the way the town boundaries are set, I think we've artificially made the problem look worse than the reality of life. I mean, like Peter just said, people working in Keystone and living in Summit Cove doesn't count. They find Summit Cove affordable, but.
And Dillon Valley, I mean, yeah.
But to our report, it makes it look much worse. That's my concern.
Could I address that briefly?
Yes, go ahead.
So I think the idea of is the narrative of housing in the comprehensive plan more alarmist than necessary was addressed in the last council meeting. And the way that the council felt was that the right tone was struck through the plan for what they interpret as the direction that they will go in terms of implementing the plan and working towards their strategies. One thing they did agree on is that once this is adopted, they plan to create in the next, I'm going to say few months, a strategic plan that takes all of these priorities and pillars and works them into a, what are we doing first? What is the most necessary priority to take step by step? So I think that council is looking into that idea as a whole, and that's probably a good realm for them to be looking at the comprehensive plan in the housing section.
And I like the comment that was made. Again, it goes to a broad statement on financeability. And that is, we have to do the needs assessment. Is it every 5 years? Or is it 3? And in order to be recognized for DOLA funding programs. And
Right.
we're not doing all this work and not having the ability to be recognized by DOLA. So I think you stay true to that format. It's a factual statement.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
Go ahead, Jeff.
another thing that's maybe like helpful context in this is, to your question, David, about where does it land, right? I mean, I think it's always a little bit tricky because the way that the question was framed in public engagement was, how would you want in what ways would you want the community or the town to invest in the community? And so the top 5 kind of translate to this sort of planning pillars of conservation, connectivity, parks and rec, community cohesion, and then affordable housing did come in number 5. So that's I would say they tend to fall right actually in kind of relative order, at least on page 7. But I think to Jess's point, right, like the plan tries to take the framing, or at least we tried to be intentional about putting the framing in the plan of here's the information with which you all can use to then make your priorities and decisions, as the people that are kind of responsible for implementing the plan. So it sounds
Right.
like there's kind of some momentum around prioritization. Another thing I'll say is that, the Keystone housing needs assessment is certainly complicated in part because of like the amount of the mix of deed restricted housing and the mix of market rate housing. But another thing I'll say is that, and this is something that Brian would probably say here, so I'm trying to channel my inner Brian, is that housing markets tend to kind of ignore community boundaries, and so fitting with like the housing situation described in the housing needs assessment for Keystone is also sort of, I would say, like view it as nested within that of like the other planning work that's being done in Summit County around their housing needs assessment. And so I think that there's a little bit of that like kind of give and take that, it's kind of being captured on both ends. And, it's, you all can you have the data that's pertinent to your community. So you can, use that information to make the investments and the best decisions that you can make. aligned with your priorities, but know that also there's other housing planning work that's happening sort of around you that's intended to kind of catch some of the other folks that exist within Summit County writ large.
I do have a general
Yeah.
comment with regards to the emphasis on that one. There's one word in it that bothers me, and it's the word crisis. The word crisis implies to me a particular, SA number one, do it first, don't worry about, find the money, do it, figure it out. And I don't believe the rest of the document really implies that word crisis. So that bothers me in the summary, that word crisis shows up. Something like it's critical to the character of the town and our workforce. Absolutely would agree with something like that. But calling it a crisis without immediately saying what you qualifying it with regards to the scope of it, as a crisis because, every home, is in trouble, or all the STRs are in trouble, or whatever. Bothers me a little bit that when I read that again in the summary section, I said, crisis is, in my view, is not the right word.
And it's the very first sentence, preserving and creating opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah, that should be an easy fix just to get rid of crisis. I think
Yeah.
Dylan
Yep.
already did it.
I'm actually kind of doing that right now. I just
Yeah.
control that for it, so I can just flag those.
Thank
Because the
God.
rest of the document and the conversation with the town council definitely alluded to what I consider not a crisis. Crisis implies something to do immediately, you don't have to worry about contemplating too much, I reserve that term for floods and famine and wildfires.
Right.
I will say that I think that's probably
all
good.
being at the same time, et cetera.
And while you're on that same opening sentence, okay, limited capacity and high costs make that impossible. Okay, it's a feasibility question, okay? So it's a matter of the proven feasibility of ground up development is it's hit or miss without some kind of incentive. I don't know how you want to say it, but impossible. Building housing is impossible. I'm sorry.
I agree
Yeah,
that that's slightly another overstatement, not feasible, not cost effective, whatever might be the right
Cost
word.
effective's good.
But impossible
Yeah.
is not in my vocabulary.
Dylan, do you want a developer lecture? I'll give it to
I've gotten plenty of those in my career, but
I even know the mayor is thinking about the land that we're sitting on right now as being a potential source of housing. So I don't consider that necessarily impossible, but absolutely takes a whole lot of legwork and is one of the most expensive mechanisms. Enforcing that you can't build your way out of this.
So on
Yeah, I
that
just want to
same
say one thing
page,
about the crisis framing. I think it goes against sort of like the neutrality of the rest of the document, trying to,
Yes.
I think a lot of the rest of the document does kind of try to tonally frame things as like, here's maybe a challenge, here's an opportunity, but not trying to get into sort of like an extreme or taking necessarily sort of a point of view that could be viewed as either political or not. I think one thing that I will say, and this is just sort of agnostic, me trying to communicate sort of my observation, is that I do think that there's probably a bit of a divide that exists on maybe your town council, and then also probably within the community too, about like what the definition of crisis is and whether or not that's like an actual appropriate framing within your community. I think so. That's just maybe one other thing to keep in mind. One thing we heard from one member of council last week when we were talking about the tonal framing of housing is that their position was that they didn't think that it was alarmist enough. So I just put that out there just to signal that, a neutral framing from the planning document is probably the best approach, because then it presents the information in a way that all people across perspectives can like make an informed decision. So I completely agree. However, I do want to just flag that there might be a difference of opinion amongst other members of the, elected officials in your community.
Encourage it to go those, for that particular word going in front of the town council. Talking
Yeah,
about
bring it up.
Okay.
critical to the workforce versus just a general crisis and being important feedback from the council.
Okay, I want to get to Steve, who's been patiently waiting. Steve, go ahead. You poor thing, you probably can't even remember your question.
Yeah, no, I do.
Okay.
Yeah, Dylan, this is kind of quick one. So in the back, it was good to read some of the comments, and one gentleman in particular, Kent, had some interesting insight, was more clarifications. And the one I kind of focused on was the one on Lakeside. So it's a two-part question. So first one is, who makes the decision of how much of those comments from others get implemented? Curious about that. And then secondly, he did bring up some good things about it's more than just activating, Lakeside. I mean, from my retail background, there's just some physical bricks and sticks issues. The physical plant just doesn't work for that. Again, it's not, it's not the end all, but I was just more curious about those comments and who's the filter that decides if any of those comments gets implemented. So that's
That's a
my
great question, Steve. Yeah, so for others, a reference, the comment from Kent referred to one of the challenges that he viewed as, maybe like why Lakeside Village isn't as successful as other areas has less to do with maybe the fact that it's not activated or that it's not year round or that there's not enough investment in it or that there's not enough clear wayfinding, but more so that it just feels like it's not attractive from like a design perspective, right? It doesn't feel like it creates the sense of place that maybe people want to spend time in. And I think that's definitely a fair critique. So to answer your question sort of a roundabout way, Steve, who makes the decision to incorporate those comments? I think Jess, Lindsay, and I kind of defaulted to a combination of council kind of weighing in on the comments, and then as sort of the elected representative body of like the community voice, kind of deciding like where that kind of falls through, and then also then the sort of two-sided. That's one frame, and the other frame is kind of what of the comments actually falls within the purview of something that the town can provide direct influence on. And for the most part, like Lakeside Village is already built. And so the design of the buildings is kind of out of scope of something that the town can really put, any sort of direct influence on, unless like some major redevelopment triggers, right? And then it comes to, you all to review and approve like sort of the design plans like that. That's like an area in which you can maybe put a thumb on the scale, but the town, we can't put in the plan that the town should, reconsider the design of Lakeside Village because that's not something that you all
no,
would
I
be
mean,
able to do.
no, I hear you. I mean, but just, I was in retail for about 20 years. And so I can just tell you the widths and depths of none of those stores work as it relates to how merchandise presented back of house. It doesn't work. It's dead end. So yeah, there's just a lot of physical. I get that isn't really the plan of this, but I don't know. That was a good comment. And when people read this, I just want to make sure they don't think, oh, all we got to do is activate this and we're going to be there and add some signs. And
Yeah.
so that was
I-
really my comment more than just make sure people understand there's other issues that need to be solved or maybe not solved. So that was it.
Yeah, that's a really
Thank
good
you.
point, Steve. I agree. I don't pretend to have the depth of knowledge that you have on retail. So I take your point that you're probably right that like the way it's laid out or is probably not serving the intended use or going to realize some of its vision. I'm sort of when it comes to like public investment or investment of public dollars, I'm sort of a champion of like the, kind of build it and they will come mentality where like, from the public side, what sort of investments can you all make that are within your purview that kind of stimulate the market to kind of move in a direction that maybe, wants to kind of capitalize on that level of investment. And so I think, showing that you are improving the wayfinding, improving the like ability for people to get to and from Lakeside Village, trying to make it a more appealing option to connect to and, communicating that it's there, right? Better signage, that kind of thing. And, maybe investing some public dollars and trying to activate the area to kind of bring a new audience to the area could be the kind of thing where it's like it brings more people to the area, and then the market gets the signal that more people are trying to, like take it, like appreciate this location, and that could send the signal to want to redevelop. That's a little bit of speculation, and it also,
No,
has
good
some
point. Good point.
like if thens, right, that are dependencies, but yeah, that's sort of the framing that we took, which is what sort of levers do you all have to try and induce the market to kind of move in the direction that you want to see, but beyond that, a little out of our
Yeah.
control.
No,
I don't want to
okay.
necessarily
Thanks.
go down that rabbit hole, but those of us who have been around long enough remember that it was a thriving community
Yes,
before
it
the
was.
river run. So
Yeah.
the infrastructure isn't the thing that necessarily is holding it back, because there was a time where every one of those ground floors was retail, restaurants, and it was thriving before River Run came into being. So I don't think that, I mean, there are some infrastructure challenges, but I don't think the infrastructure itself is the main issue. It's just that there's been no investment in activities and making sure that people can get there.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but there's also retail has totally changed now, and it's what worked back then with Ma and Pa's and all that, that kind of made sense. That landscape has totally changed, and so the infrastructure can't change as quickly, and that's the challenge. But I think you're right, Dylan. If we check the boxes we can and help, maybe someone else goes, hey, there's some real potential here. And then they come up like, I got a solution because they see some direction or so. It's a good point.
Yeah, there's a planning blog that, kind of writes about this called Strong Towns, and they kind of have the mentality of sort of the pre-World War II sort of development cycle of sort of the feedback loop, right? Where, small bets are taken by entrepreneurs, commercial establishments, homeowners, people that kind of choose to locate in a community to invest in some capacity of the built environment, right? And they develop land, and then the community sort of takes notices and puts in roads and sidewalks. They kind of come together to like fund whatever the public investments they want to make are to kind of like support the growth that's happening there. And the more like there's sort of that feedback loop, right? The better public investments that kind of go in to support that, development that's kind of taking shape in that area, the more the market will see that there's an intentional investment from the community in this particular area and want to see new development happen. Um, I think that feedback loop tends to, it's easy to describe in, a couple minutes, but I think that's usually like a 50-year horizon, right? But I think that, the 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 thumb that you all have to put on the scale as a community is right. Like, how can you, yeah, what kind of levers can you pull to breathe, new life or send a signal to the market that it's something that you all want to steward and take care of, as a community, and then hope that, the right mix of people that want to invest in it from the private side continue to do so.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dylan, I did want to say, to be sure we didn't end the meeting without saying that I really think it's a tremendously really well done document.
Yes.
And it's very readable. It's long, but it's
This long, I
readable.
apologize about that.
It covers a lot. It covers a lot. Yeah, it has, and I like the suggestions. I like the, with the mix of suggestions, implementation points all throughout. So I really, really did think it came out just really outstanding.
I appreciate that, Melanie. That's obviously, we love to hear that. So I guess the question kind of following that is, hearing the changes and sort of the recommendations that you all provided today, if Jess and I go back and incorporate those changes, do you feel like you're prepared for us to come back to you in April, for adoption, or is there any other things that you want to make sure that we incorporate into the plan before we get to that point?
David?
There's an outstanding question still that we haven't covered.
David, I see your hand.
I have two questions. One is a clerical kind of thing, like page 120, it's the flood zones in Keystone. And there's lots of graphic images that are in there. And I think I might have seen something where you said you were going to provide links to where the source document came from. Just like looking at this and somebody could look at it, I did, and want to say, oh, is that close to this property or that property kind of a thing? That where if I had a link name to say, go to FEMA, whatever, I can see the real source document and zoom in on that kind of thing. There's other ones, some of the trails, some of the water district kind of things. Is the plan to have that in the document or not?
Yeah, we can, that'll be included.
Okay, and tying into the, where do we go next? I'll just throw out the next meeting, I'm going to be 5 time zones ahead. And I don't think I would be present virtually for it. I don't know, should we do a straw poll to say, are we going to have a quorum physically present in April to be able to vote? I'll ask that question.
I'll be physically there in April.
I'll be here. I count 1, 2, 3, 4.
Are you?
Steve?
I'm not.
I don't know. So just so I'm understand, to vote on this, we have to be there in person, Melanie?
To clarify, it's for quasi judicial reviews. That
Okay.
will be, that is not the master plan adoption, but there is
Okay.
another public hearing that night that is, I anticipate there will be another public hearing that night that is a quasi judicial matter. So we must have a quorum regardless, but in order to vote in that public hearing, I need to know. And they are on the same night. So it doesn't mean that we can't necessarily adopt the comprehensive plan without enough people present in person, but we can't have the other public hearing.
Right.
Okay, all right. Okay, and that's the 16th, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let me check on a couple things and I will absolutely get back to you.
Sure. And Kathy, if you could you tell us whether you'll be there?
You can follow up. If you know you won't make it, just let me know, send an email and keep track of that.
Oh, here, Kathy raised her hand. Kathy, go ahead. Is she muted?
She is a, yes. She is a presenter, so.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's an alternate, if you're in person and advice of somebody.
Yeah. Okay, so it looks like we're going to be okay. We should hope, if things stay as is, we should be okay. Back to your question, Dylan, then I think everyone we should be good to go in April.
The idea of a straw poll probably is a good idea to give Dylan immediate feedback. Personally, I would absolutely say, based on the conversation, I would approve just based on the verbiage that you described that's for potential changes. So I feel very comfortable with the quality and the content and the depth of the document.
I agree with that as well.
All right.
Well, this is speak forever hold your peace moment here.
Yeah, this is great. And I have, as I said, grammatical and sort of like little stuff I'm going to send to Jess. And this concludes our big discussion for tonight. So I'll ask the group if is there any other business to discuss? Because otherwise, I think our business is concluded and we could have a motion to adjourn our March meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Second, thank you. And our meeting is adjourned at just about 7 o'clock, I guess. And thank you so much, Dylan. Excellent
Thanks,
job.
Dylan.
Great
Thanks.
work, Dylan.
Great
Thank
job.
you all so
Yeah.
much. It's
Thank
been my
you.
pleasure, honestly, working.
See everybody. Bye.
It's been a great project. Thank you so much.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.